I heard the voice of God, and I ran. That was my first mistake. My name is Jonah, son of Amittai. I am a prophet of Israel. When the Lord speaks, I listen. When he commands, I obey. At least, that's what I used to do. Until the day he told me to go to Nineveh. Go to the great city of Nineveh, he said, and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. I froze. Nineveh. The very name made my blood boil. That city was evil. The capital of the Assyrian Empire, our enemies, our oppressors. The people of Nineveh had slaughtered my countrymen, burned our villages, dragged our people away in chains. They had mocked our God, crushed our spirits, and spread their cruelty like a plague across the land. And now, God wanted me to go there? To warn them? To offer them mercy? No. Absolutely not. I had spent my life preaching God's word to my people. But Nineveh? They didn't deserve a warning. They deserved judgment. Fire from heaven. Wrath. Destruction. And if God wasn't going to destroy them, then I wanted no part in his plan. So, I ran. Not just anywhere, I ran as far as I could. If Nineveh was east, I went west. Tarshish. The edge of the known world. I made my way to Joppa, my heart pounding with every step. The port was busy, ships rocking gently against the waves as merchants shouted over the salty breeze. I scanned the crowd, searching for an escape, and then, I found it. A ship bound for Tarshish. I didn't hesitate. I pushed a handful of silver into the captain's hands and boarded before my fear could catch up with me. As the ship pulled away from the shore, I felt a strange relief settle over me. I had done it. I had escaped. Nineveh was behind me. God's command was behind me. And I thought, foolishly, that I had left it all behind. But no one can run from the presence of the Lord. And I was about to learn that the hard way. At first, I thought I had escaped. The ship swayed gently as we sailed toward Tarshish, the salty breeze filling my lungs. I kept my head down, avoiding the crew's curious glances. It didn't matter who they were. It didn't matter where they were going. All that mattered was that I was leaving. Leaving Israel. Leaving my calling. Leaving God. Or so I thought. It started with a wind, soft at first, tugging at the sails like an impatient child. Then it grew stronger, whipping across the deck, making the ropes groan under the strain. The sky darkened. The waves rose. And then, chaos. A storm unlike anything I had ever seen. The wind screamed, the rain hammered down in sheets, and the sea swelled into mountains of water that crashed against the ship. The deck tilted violently. The sailors, men who had spent their lives braving the sea, suddenly looked like terrified children. They shouted to their gods, crying out to Baal, Asherah, any deity that would listen. They threw cargo overboard, anything to lighten the load. But nothing worked. The storm raged on, relentless, furious. Because this wasn't just a storm. It was my storm. I knew it. The moment the first wave hit, I knew. I stood there, drenched and silent, watching them fight against a wrath they didn't understand. They didn't deserve this. I did. But I said nothing. Not until they cast lots. It was their last desperate attempt to find out why this was happening. They huddled together, whispering frantic prayers as they drew their fates. And when the final lot was pulled, every eye turned to me. A terrible silence fell between us, broken only by the roar of the storm. "Who are you?" one of them demanded. "What is your country? What people do you belong to?" I swallowed hard. The truth weighed heavier than the storm itself. "I am a Hebrew," I said at last, my voice barely audible over the wind. "And I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, the one who made the sea and the dry land." Their faces changed. Horror. They understood. "What have you done?" they cried. The ship lurched. A wave crashed over the side, nearly sweeping us all away. "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" one of them shouted. I looked at them, the fear in their eyes, the desperation. This was my fault. There was only one answer. "Throw me into the sea," I said. "And it will become calm." Their eyes widened. They hesitated. They didn't want to do it. Instead, they rowed harder than before, fighting against the wind, against the waves, trying to save me, to save themselves. But it was useless. The storm only grew worse. Finally, with fear in their eyes, they turned to my God, the one they did not know. "Lord," they cried, "do not hold us guilty of killing an innocent man. For you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." And then, I felt hands on me, dragging me to the edge of the ship. The sea churned below, black and endless. I closed my eyes. And then, they threw me overboard. The moment my body hit the water, the storm stopped. Silence. Stillness. And then, the waves took me. The moment I hit the water, the world above vanished. The sea swallowed me whole, pulling me down with greedy hands. The cold was a sudden, merciless shock, stealing the breath from my lungs. I thrashed, kicking against the weight of the water, but the waves tossed me like a broken piece of driftwood. Up. Down. Sideways. I no longer knew where the surface was. My limbs were heavy. The salt burned my eyes, my throat. Every breath was stolen by the raging sea. This was it. The moment I had accepted death, the moment I had offered myself as a sacrifice, I thought I understood what it meant. But drowning is not a quiet thing. It is violent. I felt the current wrap around me like chains, dragging me deeper. The light above faded into a sickly, distant glow. I reached for it, but my arms were useless, my body weak. Down. Down. The pressure built in my chest, a searing pain demanding air that did not exist. The seaweed coiled around my legs like creeping fingers, pulling me further into the abyss. My ears rang with the crushing silence of deep water. And then, something moved. A shadow. A shape. Bigger than anything I had ever seen. It came from below, rising through the darkness like a living mountain. And before I could even understand what was happening, it opened its mouth. A gaping void. A cavern of slick flesh and jagged ridges. And then, I was gone. Swallowed. I expected death. A final crushing bite. A swift end in the jaws of a sea monster. But I did not die. Instead, I was inside. Alive. The moment I realized it, the panic set in. The heat, unlike anything I had ever known. Thick, suffocating, pressing in on every side. The air was heavy with rot and acid, the fumes burning my nose, my throat, my eyes. I tried to move, but the walls moved with me. They pulsed. Shifted. The flesh around me flexed and clenched, thick with mucus, slick and writhing. Every time I shifted, the walls tightened, like they were trying to swallow me again. I screamed. I fought. I threw my fists against the quivering walls, but they only absorbed the blows, the creature's muscles rippling in response. My legs kicked against the fleshy floor, my feet sinking into something soft and shifting. The stench. God, the stench. It was death itself, thick and choking, the remains of everything this beast had devoured before me. My stomach lurched, my body convulsing. I clawed, I fought, I begged. But there was no way out. No light. No air. No escape. I had wanted to run from God. And now, I was buried alive inside a living grave. At first, there was only terror. I had fought, screamed, struggled against the living prison that held me. But my strength was nothing. The creature's insides pulsed and shifted, its stomach walls tightening around me. Every breath was thick with the choking stench of decay, every movement a battle against the suffocating heat. I was dying. And yet, I wasn't. Somehow, I was still alive. I don't know how long I lay there, curled up in the darkness, my body burning from the creature's acids, my mind unraveling under the weight of what had happened. The sea had claimed me. A beast had swallowed me. And I was still here. Why? Why had God allowed this? If he had wanted me dead, the waves would have done the job. I should have sunk to the bottom of the sea, my body lost forever beneath the depths. But instead, I was here. Trapped. Alive. And then it hit me. This wasn't just punishment. This was mercy. I had run from God, and yet he had not let me escape. I had refused to speak his words, and yet here I was, breathing, able to cry out to him. So I did. In that pit of living death, I lifted my voice. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. My voice shook, but I kept going. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. Sheol. That's what this was. A grave. A tomb. A place where the dead belonged. And yet, my heart still beat. My lips could still form his name. I thought of the waves, how they had pulled me down, how the seaweed had wrapped around my body like burial cloth. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I had been lost. Dying. I had deserved death. But he had saved me. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. The words cracked as they left my lips. A sob, a laugh, somewhere in between. My God. The God I had turned my back on. He had not turned his back on me. I bowed my head, pressing my hands against the shifting walls of my prison. I had tried to flee from his presence, but there was no place he could not reach me. Not in the storm. Not in the sea. Not even in the belly of this beast. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them, I whispered, my voice hoarse. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. I didn't know if I would ever leave this place. I didn't know if I would die here, buried in the dark, lost forever in the belly of this creature. But for the first time in days, I had peace. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And with those words, the beast stirred. The moment I whispered, salvation belongs to the Lord, the beast moved. A deep, guttural groan rumbled through its insides, shaking the very walls of my prison. The flesh around me tensed, convulsing. My body lurched forward as the muscles squeezed and rippled, forcing me up, pushing me through its throat. The air grew tighter, hotter, choking the breath from my lungs. My arms scraped against the pulsing walls, my skin raw from the acids that had gnawed at me for days. The pressure was unbearable, the force relentless. And then... violence. The beast thrashed. A sudden, furious spasm of movement sent me spinning, twisting through the suffocating tunnel. My body was no longer my own, it was being hurled, expelled, forced upward at a terrifying speed. And then... light. Blinding. Burning. A searing white explosion after endless darkness. And suddenly... I was out. The air hit me like fire, scorching my lungs as I tumbled through space. And then, impact. My body slammed against wet sand, the force knocking the last of the beast's bile from my throat. I gasped, retched, and collapsed. I lay there, unmoving. I could feel the sun on my skin, hot and merciless. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled my ears. The scent of salt and seaweed was overwhelming, but it was better, so much better, than the putrid stench of death that had clung to me for days. I opened my eyes. The sky above me was vast and endless, impossibly blue. I was alive. Somehow, I was alive. I pulled myself onto my elbows, my arms shaking. The thick, sticky film of the beast's insides still clung to me, coating my skin, my hair, my clothes. I stank of death and the grave. But I was no longer in the grave. I was free. I collapsed back onto the sand, my chest heaving, my mind barely able to comprehend what had happened. 3 days. 3 days inside a monster. And now, here I was. Alive. Given back to the world. Given a second chance. I closed my eyes and let out a breath that felt like my first. The God I had tried to run from had pursued me. The God I had disobeyed had rescued me. I had been thrown into the sea. Swallowed alive. Buried in the deep. And yet, God had not abandoned me. I knew what I had to do. I pushed myself up, my body trembling, my legs weak beneath me. But I stood. And I turned toward the direction of Nineveh. I had no choice now. I had run. I had fought. I had been swallowed, buried, and brought back to life. And yet, God's command had not changed. Go to Nineveh. So I went. The journey was long, and every step felt heavier than the last. My body still ached from the days inside the beast. My mind was haunted by the darkness, by the grave I had narrowly escaped. But more than anything, my heart was uneasy. Because I knew what was coming. Nineveh. A city so wicked, its evil had reached the ears of heaven itself. A city that deserved judgment. Fire. Destruction. And yet, God was sending me to warn them. The city was massive. It took 3 days just to walk from one end to the other. As I entered its gates, the people barely noticed me. Merchants haggled, children ran through the streets, soldiers patrolled lazily, their spears glinting in the sun. These people, they were my enemies. The same Assyrians who had slaughtered my people, raided our land, mocked our God. And now, I was to offer them mercy? I clenched my fists. No. I would do as I was commanded. But I would not do it gladly. I walked into the heart of the city, my voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. 40 days. I shouted. 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. My words rang through the streets. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The city that had never feared anything, feared me. But not because of me. Because of the message. And then, something impossible happened. They listened. The people of Nineveh, the murderers, the liars, the oppressors, they believed God. They stopped their business. They tore their fine clothes and put on sackcloth, the fabric of mourning. They fasted, refusing food and drink. They fell to their knees, crying out for mercy. Even the king himself stepped down from his throne, removing his royal robes and covering himself in ashes. Let everyone call urgently on God, he declared. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? Maybe God will turn and relent. Maybe he will have mercy on us. And then, God did. He saw their repentance. And he spared them. The city was saved. And I should have rejoiced. But I didn't. I was angry. I stormed out of the city, my heart burning hotter than the desert sun. I knew it. I shouted. I knew you would do this, Lord. That's why I ran. Because I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love. I knew you wouldn't destroy them. I spat on the ground, disgusted. Just kill me now. If this is how it ends, I'd rather be dead. The Lord's voice came, gentle but firm. Is it right for you to be angry? I said nothing. I climbed a hill outside the city, watching, waiting, hoping, maybe, that God would change his mind and rain down fire after all. But he didn't. Instead, he sent a plant, a simple vine, to grow over me, its leaves spreading wide, shielding me from the sun. And for the first time that day, I felt relief. But by morning, the plant was gone. A worm had eaten it, and the scorching wind returned, leaving me miserable once more. And again, I was angry. Is it right for you to be angry about the plant? God asked. Yes. I snapped. Angry enough to die. And then, the Lord spoke words that cut deeper than any blade. You care so much for this plant, though you did not make it grow. You mourn its loss, though it was here one day and gone the next. But should I not care about Nineveh? A great city with more than 120,000 people, people who do not know their right hand from their left? I stared at the city. The people I had wanted destroyed. People who had repented. People whom God had loved, even in their wickedness. I had thought this journey was about Nineveh. But it had never been about them. It was about me. About my heart. I had been given mercy, though I had run from God. I had been rescued, though I had deserved death. But mercy isn't just for me. It's for everyone. Even those I hate. I am Jonah, and this was my story. All glory be to God.